A female hospital janitor had grown used to being invisible, until one night she caught a strong metallic smell in the room of a dying old man. Without hesitation she slipped into the lab at midnight and ran an illegal test, knowing it was risky enough to cost her her job. But that bold, courageous act uncovered a truth that 20 of the hospital's top doctors had missed, saving the life of the dying billionaire and opening a bright future she had never dared to imagine. Before we continue, tell us what time it is and where you're watching from, and subscribe because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. The thing about working nights at Mercy General is you become a ghost. People talk around you like you're furniture. They forget you have ears. They definitely forget you have a brain. But Mira Valdez remembered everything. Tonight, standing in room 417 with her mop, she smelled something that made her blood run cold. Metallic. Sweet. Wrong. Marcus Chen lay dying in the bed, machines beeping, skin yellow, hair falling out in patches. 23 specialists had examined him over the past 2 weeks. None of them knew what was killing him. His wife visited every morning, sitting by his bedside with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands, watching her husband of 30 years fade into something she didn't recognize. But Mira knew. She'd spent 3 years pushing this mop through Mercy General's corridors, 3 years being invisible, 3 years since her scholarship evaporated, and her dreams of becoming a chemist died with her mother's medical bills. She cleaned floors now, emptied trash, existed in the margins of a world that had once promised her so much more, but her mind never stopped working. The yellowing at Chen's fingernail bases, the patchy alopecia concentrated near his temples, the gum discoloration she'd first noticed a week ago, the peripheral neuropathy that made his hands shake when he tried to hold his wife's fingers. She'd seen these symptoms before, in a toxicology textbook she'd studied until the pages fell apart, back when she was the brightest chemistry student Riverside University had ever seen. Back when professors told her she had a gift for seeing patterns others missed. Back when her future stretched out bright and certain before her mother's cancer diagnosis rewrote everything. Thallium poisoning. Someone was murdering Marcus Chen, one application at a time, and nobody with the authority to stop it was looking in the right direction. Mira moved her mop in slow, methodical circles across the floor, keeping her head down, her movements practiced and unremarkable. The door stood partially open, allowing her to hear fragments of conversation from the hallway where nurses gathered during their brief moments of respite. "It's heartbreaking," Patricia Hammond was saying, her voice carrying that particular exhaustion that came from watching patients die without understanding why. "Chen's wife keeps asking what's wrong, and we have no answers. Dr. Morrison brought in specialists from 3 different hospitals. They've run every test imaginable. I heard they're talking about calling hospice," another nurse replied. "By the end of the week probably. His organs are shutting down one system at a time. Whatever this is, it's aggressive and we're completely in the dark." The door swung wider, and Patricia entered with a fresh IV bag. "Still working on this room?" She didn't wait for an answer. "Hurry up. Dr. Morrison's bringing the whole consulting team through in 5 minutes. They're doing another evaluation, though God knows what they think they'll find that they haven't already tested for a dozen times." Patricia hung the bag with efficient movements, checked Chen's vitals with practiced hands and left without making eye contact with Mira. The invisibility was so complete, so total, that Mira sometimes wondered if she'd actually disappeared, if the uniform had somehow erased her from the visible spectrum of human awareness. She moved to the nightstand where Chen's personal items sat in careful arrangement. A framed photo of him and his wife on some tropical beach, both of them younger and laughing. An expensive watch that probably cost more than Mira made in 6 months. A phone with a cracked screen. And there, pushed slightly to the back as though to seem innocuous, a tube of prescription hand cream, the expensive kind, imported from Switzerland with ingredients listed in 3 languages. Mira lifted it carefully, studying the label with the trained eye of someone who used to read chemical compounds the way other people read novels. The ingredients looked standard, therapeutic, harmless, but when she opened the cap, that metallic smell intensified, flooding her nostrils with a scent she recognized from exactly one place, a graduate-level lab demonstration when Professor Chen, no relation to the dying man, had shown them how certain heavy metals could be masked in everyday substances, how poisoners throughout history had hidden their weapons in plain sight. Her pulse quickened, hammering in her throat. She knew that smell, had encountered it exactly once, but her memory was precise, photographic when it came to chemistry. The distinctive odor of thallium sulfate, barely detectable beneath the lavender and chamomile oils, but unmistakable to someone who knew what to look for. The door opened again. This time a man entered, tall, expensive suit cut to emphasize his athletic build, the kind of polished confidence that came from never being questioned or doubted. Stephen Walsh, according to the visitor badge clipped to his jacket. She'd seen him before, always bringing Chen small gifts, always staying just long enough to seem concerned without being intrusive, always leaving before medical staff could engage him in detailed conversations. He noticed her with the mild surprise people reserved for furniture that unexpectedly moved. Still cleaning. "I'll just drop this off for Marcus and get out of your way." He placed a fresh tube of hand cream on the nightstand, identical to the one already there, and adjusted its position with unnecessary care, making sure it sat prominently within easy reach of Chen's right hand, the hand he naturally favored. Mira kept her eyes down, her hands busy with her cloth, but every cell in her body screamed attention to that simple gesture. Too deliberate, too careful, too practiced. The movement of someone who'd done this many times before and had refined the ritual to perfection. "He's really declining fast," Walsh said, speaking more to himself than to her, performing concern for an audience that didn't exist. "Terrible thing. We've been friends for 20 years, built our company together from nothing. Started in his garage, worked 100-hour weeks, made it into something worth $50 million, and now," he trailed off with practiced sadness, checked his expensive watch, the kind that cost more than a car, and left, his footsteps confident against the tile, a man who walked through the world certain of his place in it. The moment the door closed, Mira stood frozen, her cleaning cloth clutched in white-knuckled hands. The pattern crystallized with devastating clarity, each piece clicking into place with the precision of a chemical equation balancing itself. Walsh visited every 48 hours, she'd noted it on her rounds, the regularity catching her attention the way patterns always did. Fresh hand cream appeared every visit, positioned carefully for easy access, and Chen's condition worsened on a schedule that aligned too perfectly with those deliveries. A spike in symptoms roughly 6 to 8 hours after each visit, followed by slight stabilization before the next application. This wasn't medicine failing. This wasn't some mysterious illness baffling the medical establishment. This was systematic, calculated, methodical murder, happening in plain sight while everyone with the credentials to stop it looked everywhere except at the obvious. She finished cleaning the room on autopilot, her hands moving through familiar motions while her mind raced through possibilities and obstacles. In another life, the one where scholarships didn't evaporate, and mothers didn't get cancer and dreams didn't die under the weight of medical bills, she would have walked straight to the attending physician and presented her findings with the confidence of someone whose expertise mattered. But in this life, she wore burgundy scrubs with environmental services stitched across the back, and people like her didn't interrupt consulting teams to suggest diagnostic theories. They emptied trash cans and kept their observations to themselves and accepted their place in the rigid hierarchy that governed every interaction within these walls. Mira pushed her cart into the hallway, where the fluorescent lights hummed their eternal song and the hospital moved through its nighttime rhythm of beeping monitors and hushed conversations. Down the corridor, she could see Dr. Morrison gathering his consulting team, 6 physicians in white coats, all wearing expressions of professional concern mixed with the particular frustration of experts confronting a problem that refused to yield to their expertise. She could tell them, right now, walk up to that cluster of authority and explain what she'd figured out. But she knew exactly what would happen. They'd stare at her uniform, they'd exchange glances that said everything without words. They'd dismiss her with polite condescension, maybe even kindness, the way you'd pat a child on the head for trying to help with adult problems. They'd return to their important work while the janitor went back to mopping. She'd been invisible for 3 years. She knew how this worked, knew it in her bones, in the particular ache that came from being intelligent in a body society had decided didn't matter. Marcus Chen was going to die unless someone listened to a woman nobody saw. Mira spent her 15-minute break in the staff lounge, hands shaking as she pulled up medical databases on her phone. The room hummed with the white noise of an old vending machine and someone's forgotten radio playing soft jazz. A respiratory therapist dozed in the corner chair, mouth open, snoring softly. 2 nurses whispered over coffee at the far table, their voices carrying fragments of gossip about Dr. Morrison's upcoming divorce and speculation about which of the surgical residents he might be sleeping with. Nobody paid attention to the custodian in the corner. Every article about thallium poisoning confirmed what she already knew. Symptoms: peripheral neuropathy starting in the extremities, gastrointestinal distress, alopecia in a specific pattern, skin discoloration, neurological decline. Timeline: symptoms typically appearing within days of exposure, worsening with continued contact, fatal within weeks if untreated. Exposure method: most commonly through skin contact or ingestion, easily masked in cosmetic products or food. She had to speak up, had to force them to listen. A man was dying, and she held the answer they were missing. "Mira, your break's over." Patricia stood in the doorway, clipboard in hand, expression suggesting break time had been a generous gift that was now being recalled. "We need 417 deep cleaned. Dr. Morrison wants everything perfect for when Chen's family comes tomorrow morning. They're calling in hospice consultation. He's not going to make it much longer." Hospice. The word hit like a punch to the sternum, driving the air from her lungs. "Patricia." Mira stood too fast, her chair scraping against the tile. "Has anyone tested Marcus Chen for heavy metal poisoning?" The nurse blinked, surprise flickering across her tired features. "Heavy metals." They ran a comprehensive tox screen when he was first admitted. Everything came back negative. But did they specifically test for thallium? Patricia's expression shifted, surprise morphing into concern, the kind nurses reserved for people behaving oddly, for patients who might be having a psychological break disguised as a medical question. "Thallium, Mira, that's incredibly rare. Why would you even think of something that obscure? The symptoms match perfectly, the pattern of decline, are being thoroughly evaluated by qualified physicians." Patricia interrupted, her tone staying gentle but becoming firm, establishing boundaries that had apparently been crossed. "I appreciate your concern, honestly I do, but diagnostic decisions aren't your area. The consulting team has decades of combined experience. If there was something to find, they'd find it. But the hand cream, Mira." Patricia's voice dropped lower, taking on the quality of someone delivering uncomfortable truth. "I know you used to study chemistry or whatever before you worked here, and that's great, but you're not a doctor, you're not a nurse. You're not qualified to make medical suggestions, and frankly, it's inappropriate for you to try. Focus on your cleaning duties, okay? That's what you're here for. That's what you're paid for." The dismissal landed softly but completely, a velvet hammer that left no room for argument. Mira nodded, swallowed the rising heat in her chest, anger and humiliation mixed into something that tasted like bile, and walked past Patricia into the fluorescent-lit corridor, where her cleaning cart waited like a faithful reminder of her place in the hospital hierarchy. She returned to 417, where Marcus Chen continued his slow decline toward death, and began the methodical process of making everything spotless for a family who would soon gather to say goodbye to a man who didn't need to die. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her mind kept circling back to that tube of hand cream, to Stephen Walsh's careful placement of a fresh supply, to the pattern that was so clear it practically screamed its own truth into the void. She couldn't let this go. But how did you force people to listen when everything about you, your uniform, your title, your position in the social architecture of the hospital, told them not to? The door opened with its distinctive pneumatic hiss. Dr. Morrison entered first, followed by his full consulting team, 6 physicians in white coats and expensive shoes, their postures radiating the particular confidence of people accustomed to being the smartest in any room. They gathered around Chen's bed like priests conducting a sacred ritual, speaking in the coded language of medicine that Mira understood better than they realized. "Hepatic markers continue to rise," one said, scrolling through a tablet with practiced swipes. "Neurological function declining across all measured parameters. We're looking at multi-system failure with no clear etiology. Could be a variant autoimmune response," another suggested, a younger physician with wire-rimmed glasses and nervous energy. "Something attacking multiple organ systems simultaneously, or an undetected infection. Something opportunistic that's not showing up in standard cultures. The progression is too rapid for standard pathology. We're missing something fundamental here." They continued their discussion, brilliant minds genuinely baffled, while Mira cleaned the floor 3 feet away, invisible as furniture, transparent as glass. She straightened, still holding her mop, and cleared her throat. No one looked at her. She cleared it louder, the sound cutting through their medical discussion. Dr. Morrison glanced over with mild irritation, the expression of someone interrupted during important work. We'll be done in a moment. If you need to finish the room, please come back in 15 minutes. Dr. Morrison. Her voice came out steadier than her heartbeat. I think you should test Mr. Chen for thallium poisoning. The room went silent. 6 physicians turned to stare at her with identical expressions of surprise shading rapidly into offense, as though the furniture had suddenly started offering medical opinions. I'm sorry, Morrison said slowly, each word carefully enunciated. Did you just attempt to make a diagnostic suggestion? Yes, sir. The symptoms match thallium exposure almost perfectly. The hair loss pattern, the peripheral neuropathy starting in his feet and hands, the gastrointestinal issues, the skin changes, the rapidity of decline, and you're qualified to make this assessment based on what exactly? He let the question hang in the air, eyebrows raised, inviting her to confess her presumption. I studied chemistry, advanced toxicology. She faltered under their collective stare, 6 pairs of eyes weighing and dismissing her simultaneously. Before I worked here. One of the younger physicians actually laughed, a short incredulous sound that cut through the room like a scalpel. So you're suggesting that 20 medical professionals, including 3 board-certified toxicologists, missed something you caught while mopping? The humiliation burned through her chest, hot and sharp, but she forced herself to continue. The hand cream, Stephen Walsh brings it every visit. If you test it, I think you'll find that's enough. Morrison cut her off, his voice going sharp now, all pretense of patience evaporating. I don't know what gave you the impression that your custodial position includes medical consultation, but let me be very clear, it does not. We have protocols, we have qualified staff, we have years of training and experience, and we do not need cleaning personnel interrupting critical case discussions with theories based on, he gestured vaguely at her, at the mop, at everything about her that disqualified her from mattering in this space. Whatever this is, but if you would just, this conversation is over. Please leave the room, now. Mira stood frozen for one terrible moment, feeling the weight of 6 professional dismissals pressing down on her shoulders like physical force. Then she gripped her mop handle, nodded wordlessly, and backed toward the door, her face burning, her throat tight with words that would never be heard. Just before she exited, she heard one of the physicians mutter, voice low but not low enough, "Can you believe that? A janitor playing detective. What's next? The cafeteria staff performing surgery." Soft laughter followed her into the hallway, the kind of casual cruelty that came from people who'd never had to fight to be taken seriously, who'd never been dismissed based on what they wore instead of what they knew. She pushed her cart toward the supply closet with mechanical precision, her face burning, her mind screaming that she was right. She knew she was right, but being right meant nothing when no one would listen. In the supply closet, a cramped space that smelled of bleach and industrial cleaning products and resignation, she finally let herself stop moving. Her hands shook as she gripped the edge of the industrial sink, knuckles white against the stainless steel. Marcus Chen was going to die. Stephen Walsh was going to get away with murder, and she was going to have to live with the knowledge that she tried to speak truth into a world that only heard people who looked a certain way, sounded a certain way, existed in a certain stratum of social acceptability. The door opened behind her. "Mira," she turned to find Patricia standing there, her expression softer than before, almost apologetic, the look of someone who felt bad about enforcing rules they didn't make. "I heard what happened," the nurse said quietly. "Morrison told security to issue you a formal warning. They're saying you overstepped boundaries, made the doctors uncomfortable with inappropriate suggestions." She paused, genuine concern in her voice. "I'm sorry, I know you were trying to help." "I'm right," Mira said, her voice hollow, scraped clean of everything except certainty. "He's being poisoned. I know how it sounds, but I'm right." Patricia's face flickered with something, doubt, maybe, or pity, or the uncomfortable realization that the world didn't always work the way it should. "Even if you were Mira, you can't just barge into case conferences. That's not how it works here. You have to understand the hierarchy. Your job is important, but it has boundaries. Clear boundaries, and those boundaries include letting people die." The words came out harsher than intended, and Patricia flinched as though physically struck. "I need to get back to my rounds," the nurse said after an uncomfortable silence that stretched between them like a chasm. "Just be careful, okay? Don't push this any further. You could lose your job, and I know you need this job." She left, closing the door with a soft click that sounded like a period at the end of a conversation that should have been a question mark. Mira stared at her reflection in the small mirror above the sink, a tired woman in burgundy scrubs, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, face lined with exhaustion and something new, the particular kind of frustration that comes from knowing you're right and being completely powerless to make anyone believe you. She pulled out her phone and opened the camera app. If words wouldn't work, maybe evidence would. But first, she needed to gather proof that even the most arrogant physician couldn't ignore. At 1:30 in the morning, when the hospital entered its quietest phase, that liminal space between the chaos of emergency admissions and the bustle of morning rounds, Mira used her master key to access the abandoned research lab on the third floor. Mercy General had once been a teaching hospital, back in the 1980s when medical education funding flowed more freely and research grants seemed endless. The research wing still existed, mostly empty now, except for storage of outdated equipment and forgotten files, but the basic infrastructure remained: sinks, ventilation hoods, even a few old microscopes gathering dust behind locked cabinets. She'd planned this carefully over the past 2 hours, mapping out routes, timing security rotations, identifying blind spots in camera coverage, knew which doors had functioning surveillance, which hallways the night guards patrolled on their rounds, which stairwells offered the most cover. 3 years of cleaning this hospital had taught her its rhythms and vulnerabilities better than anyone realized. The lab smelled of disuse and old chemicals, that particular combination of dust and decay and forgotten ambition, but it felt like home in a way her tiny apartment never quite did. She set up her materials with practiced care: sodium carbonate from the hardware store, distilled vinegar from the grocery, coffee filters and test strips from the 24-hour pharmacy. Not proper equipment, not even close to the sophisticated apparatus she'd used during her university years, but possibly enough to generate results that would force someone to take her seriously. First, she needed the sample. Back in 417 she worked quickly, heart hammering against her ribs. Marcus Chen lay unconscious, machines tracking his continued decline with soft beeps that measured out the remaining hours of his life. The hand cream sat on the nightstand exactly where Walsh had placed it hours earlier, positioned for easy access, innocent in its expensive packaging. Using a sterile specimen cup she'd taken from the supply closet, the kind used for routine urinalysis, innocuous enough that nobody would question its absence from inventory, she transferred a small amount of cream using a disposable tongue depressor. Not enough for anyone to notice the change in volume, just enough for testing purposes. As she sealed the sample, Chen's eyes flickered open, unfocused, pupils dilated, a dying man trying to make sense of shadows and movement in the dim room. "It's okay," Mira whispered, though he probably couldn't hear her, couldn't process words through the fog of his poisoned brain. "I'm going to fix this, I promise." His gaze drifted away, already lost again in whatever dreams or nightmares occupied the space where his mind used to live. She pocketed the sample and moved quickly back to the research lab, where the real work began. The chemistry was simple in theory, complex in execution without proper equipment. Thallium sulfate, when reacted with sodium rhodizonate in solution, produced a characteristic color change, orange to violet, distinctive and diagnostic. She didn't have pure sodium rhodizonate, but she could approximate the reaction using her makeshift supplies and the chemical knowledge that lived in her memory like muscle memory, like breathing. 2 hours later, after multiple failed attempts and one near spill that would have contaminated the entire workspace and possibly exposed her to toxic levels of thallium herself, she finally achieved results. The solution turned distinctly violet, the color unmistakable even in the dim laboratory lighting. "Thallium," confirmed. Her hands trembled as she documented everything with her phone, photos from multiple angles, close-ups showing the violet precipitate clearly, detailed notes about her methodology typed into a note app, timestamps showing the progression of the reaction from clear solution to definitive result. It wasn't proper lab analysis, it wouldn't hold up as evidence in court. Any competent defense attorney would shred it in minutes. But it was enough to force